for dev lead first and then for dev manager?
Well, I'm going to, like I do, is share a story. You can look up an article on Wikipedia, and there's a book about it called The Peter Principle. And what the Peter Principle states is everybody in a hierarchical organization will be promoted to their level of incompetence and then stay there. So they'll never be promoted again.
Right.
So the skills that they have, give them to a particular place, and then they don't go further. The same applies to the move between an IC engineer and to a dev lead and then dev manager.
Right.
It's a very different job.
Right.
In fact, what people don't get is the mental mind shift that's required here.
Right.
You no longer control your own destiny. See, as a developer, it's a control game. There's a love and control. You can come in the morning and have no software, and you can leave at the end of the day and have a piece of software that provides a business function that's working, that has never been seen before. It's a magic closure that you can take personal ownership of that gives you a level of satisfaction I've never experienced in management.
Right.
There's something special about shipping code. I love code. To me, if you can write code, do it forever. Be drug out of it kicking and screaming, and that was also my model. I got drug out of it kicking and screaming, but it wasn't because I wanted to do that. It's because my number one thing was writing code. My number two thing was, hey, I had a choice to make. We needed to have a manager, and the alternatives, I was the best of the alternatives.
Right.
I wouldn't say we had great alternatives. I was the best of the worst.
Right.
But once I made that transition, I said, okay, right back to the Peter Principle, what's required and is different about being a manager and a dev manager than was required as an IC engineer? Because if you're going to do it, you want to be good at it. If you look at over the years, historically, people went from IC engineer, they were great, they moved them into management, and some were wildly successful, but I would say over half were a disaster. And typically because their mindset hadn't changed. They tried to do the same job and use the same skills that had made them so successful as an engineer, and those are a formula to failure as a manager.
True.
So they had to pivot their mind and say, look, I now have to gain satisfaction in myself out of making others better. How do I empower them to be better than I ever was? How can each member of the team be the best that they're able to be as an individual? And that's when you really do a force multiplier. That's when you really get the leverage. It's not a control, it's actually a giving up of control, and that's the shock and awe for all of us. And I was a control freak.
And
so
that
I was
a
not good.
Very tough thing to do without training and if you're not very aware of.
And we talk about failures, okay? But one of my first biggest failures, the only thing I had going for me was I was open to feedback. I always loved in engineering debating solutions, debating choices, to have an open environment for discussion. The beauty of that is you can fix any of your flaws.
True.
And I had an engineer come to me. I still remember him tapping me on the shoulder, indicating you're ruining the team. You're too controlling, you're too directive, you're over the top, you're overbearing, okay?
Right.
We need space. You've got to enable us and give us space. And I took that home and did some soul searching, right? You have to be open to feedback, and you know what? He was right. He was right. I tried to be a control freak, to look into the code, to review the code, to change other people's code. That is disempowering your team members. That's disempowering them. You're not allowing them to do their best. They're like, this control freak, why don't you write the software? You're telling me what to do. That doesn't work. So you're never going to get any kind of scale.
That's a very good tip, that give up the control.
You know what woke me up to was I can't scale. As an individual developer, you can only write so much software in a given day.
True.
It doesn't matter how many years you do this, you're probably only going to do 25, 50 good lines of quality code a day.
Yep.
Whatever language you're on may make more business features than that 50 lines of code. That's your upper limit. Doesn't matter who you are or how long you work at it. So, that puts a throttle on your capability. So what you need is to scale. You're not going to be able to scale. You'll never have any time off. You'll never be able to think about things more broadly or longer term. So you've got to get other people to do a better job than you did at the work that you were doing before, and be an enabler and a supporter. So you have to shift from a controller to a supporter. So you've got to be bottoms up. I was top down controller, and I went to servant leader. Now it wasn't a fix overnight. It took time. But I was able to take the feedback and make the adjustments and improve over a period of time.
True. So you just mentioned, passing by, about your management philosophy, servant leader.
Yep.
So I would like to know, what is your management philosophy, and if you can talk a little more about it. What do you mean by servant leader?
Servant leader is it's all employee first. And it's easy to say that, it's actually hard to do that. And what that means is I take all of the blame when things go poorly and give all of the credit when things go well. So really, just like a coach of a professional sports franchise, you need to be that kind of a coach on the field for your team.
Right.
Which means your team is comfortable taking risk, knowing you've got their back, no matter what happens. Because if you won't support people, they'll stop taking risks, they won't push hard, they'll get demoralized, and they won't do their best work, and they won't give their best effort. I mean, optimism, I always say, hope dictates effort. If people have hope and see a direction, here's where we need to go, but I'm not going to tell you how to get there. I want you to be the owner and figure out how we're going to get there, but here's what we want to accomplish. Please help us figure out how you want to implement that, you want to accomplish it, and let them innovate. And here's a key tip for you, which I haven't seen in anybody else's video, so I think it's something unique. Don't limit your people by your own limitations. Most managers limit their staff by their own limitations. My model of the world is my mental model of the world. It's nobody else's.
True.
It's my truth, not the truth, it's my truth.
Right.
Knowing that, then you're like, you know what? You've got to allow them to develop. You got to allow them to learn, allow them to take risks, allow them to make mistakes. And then you use those as coaching moments, not in a public forum, but you just kind of go aside and say, here's a risk that you took that didn't work out. Was there things you could have done to mitigate it that would have given you a higher chance of success?
Right.
But I love the obvious to you is obvious to you.
True.
That came right out of the Brain Rules book. You can look it up. And it means that our view of the world is framed by our own experiences.
By own
and
experiences.
It's different. But also remember I said don't limit others by your own limitations. Most managers do that. In other words, they have a mental model of how fast somebody can learn, how fast they can grow, how fast they can... Why would you put those limitations on somebody else? They may not have those limitations.
True.
So get the heck out of the way. Let them go at their own pace, which may be far faster than you ever imagined. They could be far superior than you ever were.
True.
And that's a little tough on the ego, going, man, this developer is a lot better than I ever dreamed of being.
Right.
But that's when they have their best work. That's when they have breakthroughs.
True.
And so that was a really big pivot for me as I was scoping. And I probably only picked that up in the last 5 years.
Right.
Where I changed my coaching philosophy to no longer put limits on people's development speed.
True.
I'd say, you know what, some people can go through the program that I like to teach. Usually takes 12 to 18 months. Some people can do it in 6 months.
Yeah.
And my model was they can never do it in less than 12 months. Not true.
Right.
There's some people that are so spectacular and are so hardworking and are so dedicated and work so smart that they're able to do things that I was never able to do.
True. In fact, I remember this dialogue. You used to say it so often that it just engraved in me that get heck out of the way. If you hire the smart people, why the hell you are, try to micromanage and figure it out? Just get out of the way. And that mantra I also took, and all my time in Microsoft, and after that also, I do believe that's what you should do. Hire smart people and then just leave them. And so that's really good.
Let's make one small tip here that's really good, and this is out of a John Wooden book. Differentiate the difference between teaching and coaching. There's a big difference here, and it's very, very important. Is we normally try to coach people. You can't coach what hasn't been taught. You have to learn first. You have to teach first. Once you've taught somebody, then you can coach and steer. But if they don't know the core techniques, the core fundamentals, the data models, how to build object models, if they don't have the core capabilities, you're trying to coach somebody, they're not going to be successful. And that's where coaches get frustrated. The person's not able to do it. Well, you know what usually the problem is? They don't have the skills that you expect them to have. So you've got to teach them the skills. Once they have the skill set to be able to do the job well, now you can coach. But people try to coach when the person doesn't have the skills.
Yes, that's very important. So another thing you said just now, which is very important, and I want to dig deep a little bit, because I also realized just very, too late in my life though, that the most amount of harm is done to me by my own limitations, my own ego, I'm my biggest enemy. That's
For
what
sure.
I realized. And that the realization came out of my financial dealing and trying to be smart in stock market and all that. And then I realized, man, the most amount of harm I did by myself because thinking that I know too much. So you talk.
Well, you hit on something there that you've got to remain humble.
True.
The more humble you remain, and it's right out of the Principles book by Ray Dalio. You hear me quoting stuff all the time. That you sort of have to have principles and you have to remain humble. And big failures will humble you.
True.
But the sooner you become humble, the better it is for you. My experience in China, working for a year and a half, I worked with some of the smartest engineers I worked for, and people were humble. It was a cultural element to be great team players and to be humble. And when I lived in that environment and realized, you know what? I got folks coming in here that are billionaires, coming in working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, just like the rest of us, sitting with the rest of us, doing everything with the rest of us. They're humble. Yeah. Some of the most brilliant people I've ever met, they're absolutely humble. And I realized, you know what, there's a lot of benefits from being humble. Because I think when you were humble, you listen better. I think I listened and learned and really took in input better when I sort of humbled myself and sort of kept the ego under control. Early in my career, I let the ego get out of control. And frankly, I was rewarded for it in a lot of ways. But as I matured over time, I realized that that also puts ceiling and limit conditions on your ability to advance. Because some of the things that were a strength at my job level, where I was at, became a weakness. Remember I talked about the Peter principle, that you have to reassess skills on every promotion. You've got to do a complete reassessment, and you may have to do major surgery, because here's what I would challenge you. If you get promoted and you don't have to reinvent yourself, it wasn't a real promotion. You should have been there already.
Yes.
You should have been there already. The test of a promotion is if you have to fundamentally reassess, study more, study others, study what they've done, learn the new space. If you're not having to do that, either you're going to be poor at that, and you're going to be stuck at that level because you're never going to be any good at it, or you're going to thrive. In other words, once you again being humble. My skills that got me to level 2, level 3 aren't getting me to the next level. Those could become limit conditions for my next move.
Exactly.
So you're always thinking 2 promos ahead, current promo and the next one, and you're always thinking, okay, what are the gaps that I have? Who are the best people in the job at the next level I see? What is strong about them and what is different? The other thing is you mentioned, which is as you go up, think about management in 3 dimensions. People don't tend to think of it in 3 dimensions, but there's really 3 dimensions to management. Managing down, which is what you are at a level 1 manager. Most of your time is managing down. There is a little bit of time managing out, but a lot of times that's handled by the person next up from you. So there's a little bit of managing out, there's a little bit of managing up. But now as you become second level, now you have to do all 3 well. You have to manage down effectively, you have to manage out effectively, and you have to manage up effectively. And you know what? All 3 of those are vastly different skill sets. You actually require drastically different skill sets. And probably the most important skill to develop is you got to learn to change your communication to the needs of the audience that you're talking with. So if you're dealing with business leaders, you have to master business terminology so that you're talking to them in a language that they can understand and they can be at their best. You don't want each person working with you have to reverse engineer what you're trying to say. What you've got to do is say, if I'm dealing with a technical audience, I can talk about code and APIs and all this kind of stuff. Senior managers don't care about any of that stuff. So what the challenge is to say, when I'm going out, what matters to those? How are their teams successful? How can they contribute? How do you make them successful? How do we bring us all along? And then when you manage up, people don't want any surprises. How do we make sure the bosses are never surprised? They never get blindsided from the top coming down. That you're setting them up. What are their OKRs? What are they being measured on? What is their view of success? And how are you enabling them to be successful? And notice you have to do a real-time pivot depending on the audience that you have. And that's the skill set that you have to develop. And it's very different managing out. And you know what? You will see managers, and watch this. Now that you're thinking about it, everybody that's out there, think about this. Look at managers who manage down brilliantly, who manage out brilliantly, and manage up brilliantly, and they're almost always not the same person. So your challenge as a manager, if you really want to be the best version of yourself, is to learn to do all 3 really well. And each one is critically important, because think about it. If I'm building a system and I'm managing down my team's delivery, I'm managing out, so I'm bringing all my partners along, but I have not set executive management expectations, we're going to be seen as a failure. We can deliver the best product in history and will be perceived as a failure because perception is reality. So you have to manage the perception of the work, not just the work itself. So and you have to communicate it in a way that your boss can communicate, what are you doing, why are you doing it, how does it align with company objectives, what's the benefit, and what was the effort required to get it there. Don't make it look too easy. If you make it look too easy, nobody assumes anything went into it. So I love this frame that they always say the hardest part's making it look easy. That's beautiful at the engineering levels. Don't do that when you go to managing up, or people take it for granted.
So I wanted to ask you this follow-up question on your initial statement on don't impose your limitation on the team. How I will know about my own limitation? That's very difficult, I feel. People don't know. There's a blind spot. So
you have to look at, it's one of the most painful things that you have to do, but you have to look at yourself, and you may not like what you see. So I got to tell you, you have to get comfortable really doing a retro on your own decision making. You need to do your own retro, and you actually need to have an environment with your employees that they're comfortable to give you honest and potentially painful feedback. I won't tell you what the employee told me, but basically told me I was a disaster as a manager. In nice words. But the beauty of it was...
When did that happen?
That was at Boeing. So I was just starting to explore a little bit of management, even back in my Boeing days. I also got that again in my Microsoft era. I was making some of the same mistakes because I'd never gotten good at it. But it was only when I was actually willing to look within. I mean, it's hard to say, but you have to look at yourself and you have to be honest with yourself.
And that's the only way, I believe. There's no other way to know your own limitation.
It's right out of the Ray Dalio book on principles, right? Which is, don't view the world as you want it to be. Try to view the world more as it really is. In order to do that, you sort of need multiple people's viewpoint on it, and you need to be humble enough to say that your point of view is a biased point of view. The only question is how much bias is there and how many dimensions to the bias is there. But knowing that means you're going to get other points of view, and you want people to give you honest feedback and real-time feedback, timely feedback. You know, if you make a mistake, or say, you know, one of my issues was over time I've been developing executive presence because I'm an engineer at heart. My passion and my energy and my interest are really an engineer at heart. You know, the business is critically important, and I love that as well, but I really love engineering at the core. And so I was too geeky. And that doesn't work for executive presence because I'm rambling on about technical stuff that nobody in the room cares about. It's just distraction from them. It's imposing cognitive load on the rest of the audience. And frankly, they just tune you out. So I realized, you know what, how you communicate it. And the other thing I do is I turn the passion up and down now. I choose, and I usually use the passion part of my repertoire when I'm working with employees because I want to inspire them and give as much as I can so they do their best work. But when I deal with executive management, I just turn that off. I got to just put it into calm, put it into neutral, facts and data. What do we need to do? How do we need to do there? And that took me, I've only developed that in the last 3 or 4 years.
That's a very, very important thing because I realize, like, I see you as the most positive person, and you know, you can inspire anybody and high energy and all that. And you are saying you are turning off the passion when you are having a meeting on the seniors. Wow, that's very important.
Because they'll tune you out. In other words, they don't want to see some animated engineering manager blabbing his gums about some technical stuff that's irrelevant.
Very important.
They're interested in how are you going to make their business successful? How are you going to make money? How are you going to increment gross profit, gross bookings? How are you going to sell more units? You've got to then change your language to what matters to them, and you got to pivot the technology. What does it enable? What are the business scenarios that it enables? And so you're having to change. Notice you're changing what you say to the audience that you have. And that, to me, I only developed in the last few years. So I've been doing this over 30 years, and I didn't develop that skill until recently. And so that's why you always have to get better every day, right? Every single year you want to be a little bit better than the previous version.
These are golden words, I will say. This is very, very good tip. So we'll change a little bit the gear here, Mike.